Meanwhile, a growing number of Democratic lawmakers are throwing their support behind a new proposal to fight climate change called the Green New Deal. Now, the strategy will shift the U.S. from fossil fuels to clean energy to help eliminate greenhouse gases within a decade. It focuses on creating jobs for working-class Americans that help transform the country's infrastructure. Activists say it requires a rapid and urgent shift. And one of the new Green Deal's main sponsors is Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who's pushing for a U.S. with no carbon emissions. But some say it lacks political support and policy development. Well, let's bring in John Reilly for more on the proposal. John is the co-director of the MIT Joint Program on the Science and Policy of Global Change. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So give us a brief overview of the goals of the Green New Deal and how it differs from the existing model.
So the goals are to have a crash program to reduce greenhouse gases, eliminate them in the economy in 10 years, make a fairer economy, and a more inclusive economy. It kind of differs from other programs in that it includes this fairer economy and more inclusive economy. It is a bit short on the implementation details, but basically it sees it as a large government investment program and a huge jobs program.
Now, when you're thinking about something of this size, obviously people are going to start wondering who's going to foot the bill for this. So talk about the sort of funding that this would require and who would be footing the bill.
Well, this would require trillions of dollars of funding. That, I think, is the question. How much of that tax would go through the taxpayer system? And then how much, but the more traditional way is to create some incentives for the private sector to make some investments. So I think that's one of the balances that have to be struck. The measure actually, advocates of this actually have this idea that the Federal Reserve can print money and that money doesn't cost anything, but that's kind of an incorrect way of looking at the problem. That risks creating inflation and undermining stability, confidence in the US dollar, which then has significant costs for the economy.
Now, we also have some new Democratic lawmakers who've entered Congress this year and really are trying to reinvigorate this. So why have we not seen more progress on this issue?
Well, they've just gotten started. I commend them for their enthusiasm and the aggressive vision they have. I think the current bill, as it's written, is a plan to develop this in more detail. So I think we're moving, but unfortunately that current set of new congressmen aren't probably enough to tip the balance to really move this legislation ahead. In the House, you possibly could, but the Senate is still Republican, and then it's not clear what would happen to it if it got to the White House. Or maybe it is clear.
Now, you mentioned that this was a combination, not just focusing on climate change, but a more just economy. Tell us about that added element.
Yeah, so I think you really have to think of these as three separate policies with three separate issues that should have three separate policies. I think it's nice to bundle them together because it makes it politically appealing, but I would suggest the fairer economy could be had by, say, a $15 federal minimum wage and a more progressive income tax structure. So that would kind of raise the incomes of poor working people. And then you probably need a jobs program of some sort that could be targeted at minority communities, low-income communities where there's high unemployment, or possibly in those communities, if we start moving away rapidly from fossil fuels, in communities dependent on those jobs so they had some work.
Now, obviously, we have a lack of commitment, at least at the government level. We're not really seeing a really big push. So are private companies stepping up enough to offset that lack of leadership?
Well, private companies are doing some things. Some of the big automobile companies have made a big commitment to electric vehicles. We have startups like Tesla. Other companies have made deep reductions. But one of the challenges they face is that they can only they can only work within what's economic given the current set of prices in the economy. So if they move ahead aggressively and their products cost a bit more and consumers don't buy them, then it really doesn't matter that they've cut their greenhouse gas emissions because they're going to go out of business. So some consumers are willing to pay a premium for products that are clean or produced cleanly, but how many consumers and how much of a premium is a question. And then you have the problem that consumers can't always really tell easily whether a company is really clean and green or it's just greenwashing. kind of creating a brand that looks green but isn't
Right.
really as effective as you might hope.
Now, we know that one of the reasons leaders like Donald Trump were elected was because a lot of people felt left behind in the globalization push. So which countries have models that the U.S. could look to in terms of implementing sustainable and effective and inclusive climate change policies?
Well, I don't know that there's been a lot on this inclusive idea. So this is kind of new. You have, Europe, China, Canada have implemented carbon pricing policies, but those have not really been inclusive. We've seen in France the problem with the gasoline tax, and you've had the same problem of many people protest in France. So getting to this inclusive nature of the policy is a new element of it, but I think it really is quite important, because I think this is one of the biggest barriers to getting climate policy through. If it's just raising energy prices, then that hurts a lot of people, so we have to overcome that.
All right, thank you so much for your insights. John Reilly there, co-director of the MIT Joint Program on the Science and Policy of Global Change.